Buckingham Palace has quietly confirmed something it avoided for nearly 3 decades. For the first time, King Charles is preparing to speak publicly about the marriage that reshaped the modern monarchy, and about the woman at the heart of it. Sources briefed on the plan say the king will reflect openly on Diana, Princess of Wales, and on the partnership that began 45 years ago. This is no routine anniversary note quietly passed to the press. Palace aides describe it as the first time Charles intends to address, in his own words, how much of his reign rests on foundations Diana laid. The remarks have not yet been delivered, but the fact they are coming at all has already sent a quiet shock through royal circles. This is not simply a personal tribute to a late princess. It touches a question the palace has never answered out loud. Who actually built the accessible, human, modern monarchy that Charles now presides over? For years, the official story kept Diana inside a single frame. The tragic princess, the people's icon, a chapter that closed in 1997. What is now emerging suggests something the establishment has always found harder to say, that Diana was not only adored by the public. In the words of one royal insider, she was a quiet co-author of the institution's survival. Not a decoration on the monarchy, but part of its load-bearing structure. To understand why this moment matters, we return to the wedding that broke centuries of protocol, the humanitarian work that redefined what a royal was allowed to be, the carefully prepared reflection now being planned, and why palace strategists believe this is the moment to make it, and how Prince William has quietly carried the same blueprint into a new generation without ever naming it out loud. Each thread leads back to the same woman, and each one complicates the story the palace has told for years. On July 29, 1981, an estimated 750 million people watched a 19-year-old kindergarten assistant marry the heir to the British throne at St. Paul's Cathedral. It remains one of the most watched broadcasts in history. The ceremony was billed as a fairy tale, and for one morning the country believed it. But the detail that mattered most was not the dress or the crowd. It was a small act of independence at the altar. Diana omitted the traditional promise to obey her husband, a break that made headlines and signaled, even then, that she intended to define the role on her own terms. She was the first Englishwoman in 3 centuries to marry a future king, and she arrived with an instinct the palace had no manual for: warmth as strategy. Almost overnight, the expectations placed on a royal shifted. It was no longer enough to be seen. The public now wanted to be met. What Diana did next changed the monarchy permanently. She treated public duty as something personal rather than ceremonial. She sat on hospital beds. She crouched to a child's height. She looked people in the eye. In April 1987, at Middlesex Hospital in London, she opened the country's first purpose-built unit for AIDS patients and shook the hand of a dying man without wearing gloves. At the time, much of the public still believed the virus could spread through ordinary touch. That single unguarded gesture did more to change perception in Britain than any government campaign of the decade. In 1989, on a visit to a hospital in Indonesia, she sat among leprosy patients and touched them with bare hands when the illness still carried centuries of stigma. She became patron of Centrepoint, the charity for homeless young people, and brought her sons along so they would see the work for themselves. Aides at the time privately worried these appearances were too raw, too close, too unlike anything the palace had done before. That discomfort was precisely the point. Diana had grasped something the institution took years to accept. A monarchy that only appeared on balconies would slowly lose the country. A monarchy that showed up at bedsides might keep it. 10 years after that AIDS handshake, in January 1997, she walked through a partially cleared minefield in Wombo, Angola, wearing a protective visor and body armor, forcing the world to look at the victims of landmines. By the time of her death that August, she was patron or president of more than 100 charities. Royal biographer Ingrid Seward has described this period as the moment the monarchy's social role shifted from distant symbol to active participant. Diana was gone, but the template she left behind was not. Now, in 2026, sources close to the planning say Charles intends to make that template explicit. According to insiders, the king will directly address how Diana's innovations between the late 1980s and 1997, the informal dress codes, the eye-level conversations, the handshake culture that replaced stiff formality, remained foundational to his own accessibility strategy as monarch. This matters more than it first appears. For years, palace communications treated Diana's style as a personality trait, a natural charm that could not be taught. Charles is now expected to reframe it as method, as something the institution learned from her and kept. Palace sources are careful to frame this as continuity rather than correction. The king is not expected to criticize how the establishment once resisted his former wife. He is expected to acknowledge, plainly, that reforms now treated as his own began with her. The reflection reportedly goes further. Sources indicate Charles will connect Diana's 1987 decision to touch an AIDS patient directly to how the family engages the public today. That same protocol shift, the willingness to be physically present with suffering rather than symbolically above it, is precisely the logic Prince William now applies to mental health. In 2016, he launched the Heads Together campaign alongside Catherine to move mental health from the margins to the center of royal work. And he has spoken candidly about how losing his mother at 15 shaped the man he became. When William talks openly about grief, therapy, and psychological struggle, he is not inventing a new royal language. He is extending one his mother wrote first. What was once seen as Diana breaking the rules is now, in effect, the rule book. And then there is the detail royal watchers find most striking. Insiders say the tribute was not solely the king's own idea. Sources suggest Prince William privately curated much of it, weaving his father's stewardship of the crown together with his mother's original humanitarian vision. In doing so, William reportedly positions Diana not as a tragic footnote to Charles's story, but as a philosophical co-architect of the very monarchy the family now runs. That is a remarkable thing for a future king to arrange. It quietly rewrites who gets the credit. It also carries a risk the palace is clearly willing to take. By raising Diana to co-architect, the family invites every old comparison back into the room. The affection she commanded, the crowd she drew, the way she could make the institution look stiff simply by being herself. There is real complexity here, and it should not be smoothed over. The marriage at the center of this tribute was, by both parties' own accounts, an unhappy one. Charles and Diana separated in 1992 and divorced in 1996. For a reigning king to now publicly honor the legacy of that partnership is not a simple act of sentiment. It is a delicate negotiation with his own history, made in front of a country that watched the whole thing unravel. For Charles, sources say, the moment is personal in a way the public rarely sees. Whatever went wrong between them, he was there for the years when Diana was learning to do this, and he watched the nation fall for the very qualities their marriage could not hold together. That is what makes William's role so telling. He is the one person who can stand between his father's crown and his mother's memory, without either one canceling the other. He grew up inside both stories. He remembers the mother who took him and his brother to homeless shelters and hospital wards, teaching them that duty meant proximity, not distance. And he now serves the institution she both loved and struggled against. When William helps his father credit Diana, he is doing something no press office could ever script. He is reconciling a family narrative in public, on behalf of a nation that has never fully let the story rest. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams has noted that William, more than anyone, understands that Diana's legacy and the crown's future are no longer separate questions. They have quietly become the same question. What this moment reveals is that the monarchy has stopped treating Diana as a wound to be managed and started treating her as an architecture to be acknowledged. Whether that changes anything permanent is another matter entirely. Every year brings another anniversary, another tribute, another carefully worded sentence about a woman who has been gone for nearly 30 years. The open question is whether these commemorations slowly resolve the long tension between Diana's legacy and Charles's authority, folding one into the other until the seam finally disappears, or whether they simply restage that tension on a loop, a family and an institution returning again and again to the same unfinished conversation about who they were, who she was, and what the marriage that began in 1981 was truly for.